Well, mayors from Canada's big cities and municipalities are meeting in Quebec City, and they are calling for a new relationship with the federal government. And more, that means Ottawa working directly with municipalities in funding projects rather than relying on the provinces to transfer funds for things like infrastructure and social housing. The mayors are also meeting with the federal party leaders to hear from them as we prepare for the next federal election. Joining me now is the head of the Big City Mayors Caucus of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Edmonton Mayor Don Iveson. Don Iveson, thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure.
Okay, when you call for this new modern relationship between Ottawa and the municipalities, I've sort of alluded to where you want to go on this. Tell us more about what that would look like.
Well, we think that within the boundaries of the Constitution, there's actually tremendous opportunity for more direct collaboration. And we've seen it evolve already quite a bit in the term of this government with some of the work around housing and some of the direct relationships that we've seen formed between the federal government and the City of Toronto, for example. Some of the work on disaster mitigation, which has seen $2 billion of much needed dollars flow directly to municipalities to deal with disasters that are more common every day. And hopefully prevent some of those losses to productivity and disruption to families from happening in the future. And then the biggest one was the doubling of the gas tax in this budget, which in part the federal government had to do because it's been having challenges moving dollars through the provinces. And so we're seeing an evolving relationship as it is, and the federal government really doubled down in the last budget. What we'd like are a few more formal mechanisms. One on housing, we think, would actually help improve the rollout of the National Housing Strategy. So we think there's room to continue to innovate within the framework of the Constitution as it exists today.
Okay, well, that obviously raises a question, infrastructure. We are heading into a federal election, and we have heard reports that infrastructure funding has been slow to get to municipalities because of delays in certain provinces. Is that your experience?
That's been a challenge that the mayors discussed across the country. There has been some interference from provincial legislatures that is political, and that is a frustration to mayors because at the end of the day, citizens are wondering where is this long-promised infrastructure. Federal government has made room in its fiscal plans for it and wants to work with us. So this is a real and pressing challenge. That said, a lot of the dollars that have been announced, we needed security today, for example, to start building a light rail line that won't be open until 2026, and so. Though it's been suggested that some of the dollars are flowing slowly, that's because the shovel will go in the ground next year once I finish my procurement this year. I can only do my design and procurement this year because I have certainty about long-term funding, which is why we're continuing to press government to take their historic transit investment and make it permanent and ongoing so that we can continue to roll those investments forward into the future because we're ramping up after decades of underinvestment all across the country, especially in big transit.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. I mean, we have heard the finance minister, we've heard the infrastructure minister, federal, and we've heard the prime minister saying that there's been a slowdown in projects in Ontario. Is that the case?
We heard from the Deputy Mayor of Toronto and a number of other Ontario mayors that there are real delays as a result of dollars held up at Queen's Park. And so it is a real frustration for the mayors, and it's sort of cause for this continued conversation about direct relationships and direct funding mechanisms like the gas tax, building on that. But again, ideally, what I think Canadians expect is for all orders of government to sit down at the table. However, when you have provinces who are either abdicating responsibility or playing political games, then it's more important than ever that we get on with business for Canadians with these direct mechanisms.
Okay, I have to ask you a few things because, as I mentioned, you are hearing from the party leaders and you are also having workshops about the election preparedness and what your priorities are. I don't know the answer to this, but one of the big things that's being discussed in the lead up to the federal election is the issue of the carbon tax, the federal carbon tax. Does the FCM or do the big city mayors, which is a subset of the FCM, do you have a common position on that?
You would find different positions from each city on the specifics of how to respond to climate change, but what you would find is pretty strong agreement across this organization, which has been talking about climate change as a threat to our communities and a threat to our economy for more than 20 years, as a matter of fact. A session I was just in was celebrating some of the milestone work that Federation of Canadian Municipalities have been doing, taking this issue seriously before provincial or federal politicians were even debating it, much less wedging our country apart over it. So we take the threat to our economy and infrastructure very, very seriously. As to the best response, you'd get different answers.
Okay, depending on different cities or different municipalities.
Well, you can, and the Pan-Canadian framework allows for different pricing mechanisms, different regulatory mechanisms to come into place, and the federal government will only step in with their tax and pollution price in the event that a province says we're not, going to move into that space.
Right.
And so
Okay.
that presents another opportunity to work directly with municipalities if a province doesn't want to deal with climate change. And we stand ready to work with the federal government and any other partner that takes this issue as seriously as we do.
Okay, just another question, because I know this has been the subject of many interviews we've done over the last few months, but marijuana, it's now been about 7 months since the legalization. We heard from the municipalities very loud and strong asking Ottawa to press the provinces to make sure that they speaking of transfers, they transfer sufficient funding for the costs associated with regulating and policing marijuana. How is that funding for marijuana policing and regulation going?
We had a very candid conversation with the Prime Minister about this earlier today, and he's as frustrated as we are because the federal government vacated some of its space in the excise tax explicitly with the expectation that provinces would pass some of it through to help us cover tangible costs of legalization on the ground. In only 3 of 10 provinces has that happened, and in those provinces, it's a pittance compared to the new revenues that provinces stand to gain. And so it's yet another example of where the federal government, where we need the federal government not to trust that a province is going to do the right thing. It used to be able to count on that in this country, but this is why we need these direct mechanisms to flow dollars through to us if provinces won't play ball. And that's happening far too often, and the mayor's discussed this as an issue from coast to coast.
Okay, well, Don Iveson, thank you very much. Very interesting as always. Thanks for speaking with us.
My pleasure.